Professor Asma Parveen from Department of Psychology, Aligarh Muslim University. Welcome back to this course on Fundamentals of Research, and today I will be talking about field experiments. Field experiments are a type of research conducted in real life settings such as the environment where the participants normally live. Unlike other types of experiments, field experiments allow researchers to change one specific factor, which is known as independent variable, and observe how it affects another factor, that is the dependent variable. The advantage of field experiments is that they provide insights into how things work in the real world as opposed to controlled laboratory settings. However, it is important to understand that in field experiments, researchers cannot control all the other factors that may also influence the outcome. Essentially, field experiments offer a way to study phenomena by manipulating one variable and observing the resulting effects. This method is very commonly employed in psychology to observe how individuals behave in their everyday environments while also creating specific scenarios for study. For instance, researchers may be interested in examining how students react when faced with a substitute teacher instead of their usual instructor. A very famous example of field experiments conducted by a researcher named Hoffling in 1966 to investigate the level of obedience among nurses. This study involved 22 nurses who were working the night shift at a psychiatric hospital, unaware that they were actually part of the experiment. During their shift, the nurses received a phone call from a doctor who was actually the researcher himself. Unknown to the nurses, this doctor instructed them to administer a patient an extremely high dose of medication, twice the recommended amount. Furthermore, the doctor assured the nurses that he would grant them permission to administer the medication later on. The main objective of this field experiment was to determine whether individuals would adhere to rules and obey figures of authority. The Hofling study serves as an example of a field experiment because it was conducted in a real life setting rather than a controlled laboratory experiment. In this particular experiment, the researcher manipulated the situation by instructing the nurses to administer an excessive dose of medication, and the purpose behind this manipulation was to observe whether the nurses' obedience would be influenced by the person in charge. This study sheds light on the complex dynamics between individuals and authority figures. It raises questions about the extent to which people are willing to follow instructions even when those instructions may go against their better judgment or established guidelines. The fact that the nurses were willing to consider administering such a high dose of medication, despite it being clearly beyond the recommended limit, highlights the power of authority and the potential for individuals to overlook their own ethical concerns in deference to someone in a position of power. Moreover, the Hoagland study uncovers the importance of ethical considerations in research also. While the experiment provided valuable insights into human behavior, it also posed significant ethical dilemmas. The nurses were unknowingly placed in a position where they had to make a decision that could potentially harm a patient. This raises important questions about the responsibility of researchers to prioritize the well being and safety of participants even in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. Overall, the Hoffling study serves as a thought provoking example of the influence of authority on individual behavior. It demonstrates the potential for individuals to blindly follow instructions even when those instructions may have serious consequences. Additionally, it highlights the need for researchers to carefully consider the ethical implications of their studies and ensure the well being of their participants. By examining the complexities of obedience and authority, this study contributes to our understanding of human behavior in real life situations. When we are conducting an experiment, there are several important steps to follow. First one is it is very important to understand the goal of the experiment, that is, the objectives of the experiment, and this will help guide the decisions of the researcher throughout the process and ensure that the researcher focused on what they are planning to achieve. Once the researchers have a clear understanding of the goal, they need to choose the factors and response variables that they are studying. Factors can be experimental or classification, and they can be quantitative or qualitative. Experimental factors are ones that researchers can control and assign randomly, while classification factors are simply labels for the different groups in the experiment. Carefully considering these factors and their categories is essential when designing the experiment. This step ensures that researchers are studying the right things and the results will be meaningful. Another crucial step of conducting a field experiment is standardizing the procedure. This means following a set of steps or guidelines to ensure consistency and reliability in results. By standardizing the procedure, researchers can eliminate any potential sources of bias or error that could affect the validity of the findings. Before conducting the full experiment, it is always a good idea to do a pilot test. This involves running a smaller version of the experiment to identify any potential issues and make necessary adjustments. By doing a pilot test, researchers can catch any problems before they have a chance to impact the final results. This step is crucial for ensuring the success of the experiment and avoiding any unforeseen complications. There are different types of field experiments, and they allow researchers to study the effects of certain variables on people or situations. Basically, there are two main types of field experiments. One is those where the researchers intentionally manipulate the variable being studied, and those where the change occurs naturally without any interference. In the first type, the researcher purposely alters the conditions to observe the impact on the subjects. For instance, if someone wanted to investigate how the inability to read a newspaper affects individuals, they could conduct a field experiment by deliberately restricting access to newspapers for a group of participants. On the other hand, the second type of field experiment involves observing changes that occur naturally without any intentional manipulation by the researcher. This approach allows for a more realistic understanding of how certain factors influence people's behavior or outcomes. For example, if a researcher wanted to examine the effects of a natural disaster on a community, they could conduct a field experiment by observing the community both before and after the event without interfering in any way. Field experiments offer several advantages over other research methods. Firstly, they have higher ecological validity, that is, the results are more likely to reflect real life situations. This is because field experiments take place in natural settings, allowing for a more accurate representation of how people would behave in their everyday lives. Additionally, field experiments are less susceptible to demand characteristics and the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect occurs when individuals alter their behavior because they know they are being observed. By conducting experiments in the field, researchers can minimize these effects and obtain more genuine responses from the respondents. Another advantage of field experiments is their high mundane realism. This means that the setting and materials used in the study closely resemble real life situations. By replicating the conditions of everyday life, field experiments increase the external validity of the findings. This is particularly useful when studying large scale phenomena that cannot be replicated in artificial settings. For example, when investigating changes in the behavior of children at a school, a field experiment would be appropriate. It could compare their behaviors with their regular and substitute teachers, providing valuable insights into the impact of different teaching styles. Field experiments also provide a high level of external validity, that is, the findings can be generalized to real world settings. By studying people in their natural environments, researchers can better understand how variables impact individuals in their everyday lives. Additionally, field experiments also allow for the examination of complex interactions between multiple variables, providing a more comprehensive understanding of the phenomena under investigation. Furthermore, field experiments also allow researchers to establish causal relationships by manipulating a variable and measuring its effects. This experimental design enables them to determine the cause and effect relationship between variables with greater confidence. However, it is crucial to consider extraneous variables that may influence the results. These variables are factors other than the manipulated variable that could potentially affect the outcome of the experiment. By accounting for these extraneous variables, researchers can ensure the validity and reliability of their findings. Field experiments, while valuable in their ability to study phenomena in real world settings, come with several disadvantages. And one of the major drawbacks of field experiment is the lack of control over external factors or extraneous variables that could influence the results, making it difficult to establish cause and effect relationships with confidence. This limitation also makes replicating field experiments challenging, raising questions about the reliability of the findings. Additionally, field experiments often collect data from a biased sample, limiting the generalizability of the results to a larger population. Moreover, the complexity of field experiments introduces difficulties in accurately recording data due to the multitude of variables at play. Overall, compared to other types of experiments, field experiments offer less control. In addition to these limitations, ethical concerns also arise when conducting field experiments. Obtaining informed consent from participants can be problematic as they may not fully comprehend the nature of the experiment. In some cases, researchers may even need to deceive participants in order to gather accurate data, further complicating the ethical considerations involved. So, it is crucial for researchers to carefully consider these ethical concerns when designing and conducting field experiments. Now, I will compare lab experiments with the field experiments. Lab experiments and field experiments are two types of experiments that researchers use to establish cause and effect relationships. Both types of experiments allow for high control over confounding variables, making them internally valid. However, there are also disadvantages to consider. For example, lab experiments take place in an artificial environment, resulting in low ecological validity. On the other hand, field experiments are conducted in a natural setting, making them high in ecological validity but compromising some control. One key difference between lab and field experiments is the setting in which they take place. Lab experiments occur in controlled environments while field experiments happen in real world settings. This distinction impacts the ecological validity of the results. In lab experiments, researchers have more control over variables, making it easier to manipulate and measure them. However, this controlled environment may not accurately reflect how people behave in everyday situations. Field experiments, on the other hand, provide a more realistic picture of behavior because they occur in natural settings. This higher ecological validity allows researchers to observe how individuals respond to certain variables in their everyday lives. However, conducting experiments in the field introduces more confounding variables and reduces internal validity. Researchers have less control over the environment and other factors that may influence the results of the field experiment. The choice between lab and field experiments often depends on the research questions and the approach being used. Field experiments are commonly used in situational approaches such as the social approach, where the impact of the environment on behavior is considered. Lab experiments, on the other hand, are more frequently used in dispositional approaches like the biological approach, which focus on individual characteristics rather than external factors. In terms of design, lab experiments offer more flexibility in using repeated measures or matched pair designs. These designs allow researchers to control for participant variables by comparing different conditions within the same participants or matching participants based on specific characteristics. This level of control is often harder to achieve in field experiments where researchers may have less information about their participants. Challenges of field experiments. Field experiments are a valuable tool for studying real world situations and ensuring ecological validity. However, they also present certain challenges that must be taken into account. One such challenge is the lack of control over variables compared to lab experiments. In field experiments, there are numerous factors that can vary, including environmental conditions, participant characteristics, and situational factors. This variability makes it difficult to isolate the effects of the independent variable and establish causality. Another challenge in field experiments is randomization and bias. Randomly assigning participants to different experimental conditions can be more challenging than in lab experiments. This can lead to potential biases or confounding variables that may impact the validity of the results. To address this issue, researchers must carefully consider alternative designs such as matched pairs or quasi experimental designs to control for these biases. To overcome the lack of control over variables, researchers can employ statistical techniques to analyze the data. These techniques help identify patterns and relationships between variables even in the presence of confounding factors. By using advanced statistical methods, researchers can gain a deeper understanding of the complex dynamics at play in field experiments. Another challenge is practical constraints. Field experiments, although valuable for their real world applicability, present various challenges that researchers must overcome. In order to conduct research in authentic settings, scientists often find themselves collaborating with external organizations, obtaining permissions or permits, and navigating through bureaucratic processes. These tasks demand significant time and resources, adding an extra layer of complexity to field experiments. In addition to these practical challenges, ethical considerations also play a crucial role in field experiments, particularly when human participants are involved. Researchers must ensure that participants provide informed consent, safeguard their privacy and confidentiality, and minimize any potential risk or harm associated with the research. However, compared to lab experiments, addressing these ethical concerns becomes more intricate due to the involvement of cultural sensitivities, power dynamics, and community expectations. So, balancing these factors require careful navigation and sensitivity on the part of the researchers. To address the challenges posed by limited resources and time constraints, researchers must employ efficient strategies and prioritize their objectives. Collaborating with external organizations can help alleviate some of the burdens associated with data collection and participant recruitment. Additionally, leveraging technological advancements such as remote data collection methods or virtual simulations can also enhance the feasibility of field experiments. By adapting to the ever evolving research landscape, scientists can overcome practical limitations and continue to expand the understanding of the world. Field experiments also have their limitations when it comes to generalizability. The findings obtained from one place or group may not necessarily hold true for others, making it challenging to draw broad conclusions or apply the results to a larger population. This means that caution must be exercised when attempting to make universal claims based solely on field experiment data. Another challenge in field experiments lies in ensuring the validity and reliability of measurements and data collection. Various factors such as observer bias, participant reactions, and measurement errors can impact the accuracy and consistency of the results. And to mitigate these issues, researchers must adhere to strict methods of data collection, including following standardized rules and verifying the accuracy of their procedures. While field experiments offer valuable insights, they can be demanding in terms of time and resources because conducting research in real world settings necessitates extensive planning, coordination, and financial investment. Researchers must meticulously design their experiments, recruit participants, and secure suitable locations for data collection. Moreover, due to the nature of field experiments, longer durations may be required to gather an adequate amount of data, thereby increasing the time and resource commitments. Another challenge is external validity, which refers to the ability to apply the findings of a field experiment to other situations. While field experiments accurately reflect real life scenarios, they may lack the level of control seen in lab experiments. This means that it might be more difficult to generalize the results to situations where control is crucial. Another challenge is interference and contamination. In field experiments, external factors can interfere with or contaminate the results. For instance, participants may experience other interventions or events during the study that could influence the outcome and reduce the reliability of the findings. However, despite these challenges, field experiments still hold significant value for studying real world phenomena because they provide researchers with the opportunity to ask questions that cannot be answered in a lab setting. By carefully considering the limitations and employing sound methods to mitigate them, researchers can ensure that their findings are valid, reliable, and applicable to the real world. This is all about field experiments. Thank you.